We're glad to welcome everybody back to our Frick and Frack Teach Sunday School. We're on Proverbs chapter 1. As is our usual custom and practice when we have a Ron Penny video, Ron has done a 7-minute Sunday school program on Proverbs 1, and we're going to do that now.
Proverbs is credited to Solomon. The book was written not merely to provide the Jewish nation with wisdom and knowledge, but to help them develop godly practices, fear and reverence of God, knowledge of God's definition of right and wrong. Chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs contains 10 speeches of a father to a son, counseling the son to make wise decisions and fear the Lord. Our lesson is a part of that section of the book. This introductory chapter starts by explaining that these words written by Solomon were not provided just to be memorized. They were to teach wisdom and self-control. They are provided to help Israel and to help us understand what life means and where we are going. Now, let's remember, Israel is a relatively young nation with 12 tribes that don't particularly get along with each other. Both Solomon and David worked hard to unify the nation. Solomon needs the nation to have shared values, societal norms. So, as he writes to Israel and to us, he's writing a manual for living so that we will learn what is right, what is just, what is fair. He is seeking to teach the inexperienced nation the basis for making decisions, which was and is godly values. There's a Native American proverb that says good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from poor judgment. Like any good father or any wise leader, Solomon is trying to provide guidance, a how-to manual, so that Israel, a young nation, will not have to fall prey to poor judgment in order to learn. Solomon wants the young son, the young nation. He wants you to know that knowledge begins with a respect for the Lord. Only the foolish hate wisdom that comes from God. Like a father talking to a son, trying to instruct them and instill in them self-control, he says, we can't make up our own rules. We have to follow those rules set down by God. No matter how old you are or how good you remember you were, there was a time in your life when you, like every other person, thought that your parents just didn't understand. Solomon is saying here, my child, my son, listen to your father's teachings and do not forget the advice of your mother. Listening to your parents in general is very good advice. And Solomon is assuming that you have godly parents, because when I'm out in the store and I see parents using profanity at their children, parents more interested in buying books about what Kim Kardashian is doing than buying a reading book for their child to learn how to read, I wonder and worry about the values that they are instilling in that child. In essence, what Solomon is saying here is listen to the godly men and women God has put around you, recognizing their wisdom and counsel, and seek to direct your life based upon their godly counsel. One of the greatest blessings of my life is being surrounded by godly family, parents, and to be surrounded by friends who had godly parents, who had instilled in them godly values. Solomon knows we will all have sinners who come around us. And Solomon is saying that when sinners seek to seduce you onto the wrong path, do not follow them. Peer pressure, even beyond your teen years, can influence a young Christian's decisions. Solomon is saying, Follow your own godly path and the godly direction that you get from others. Using the literary tool of personification, Solomon writes, Lady Wisdom goes out into the street and yells a speech in the town center. In the middle of the traffic, she takes her stand as at the busiest corner she calls out. Like a frustrated mother, she yells, "You foolish, immature people, how long will you be foolish and immature? How long will you make fun of wisdom and hate knowledge?" If we're honest with ourselves, some of us have heard this speech. We've heard our mothers say, "Boy, when are you going to grow up? When are you going to wise up and fly right?" Some of us have even given the warning that Solomon is issuing here, because Solomon is basically saying, you make your bed, you must lie in it. Or if you run with dogs, you're going to come home with fleas. There are consequences to our poor decisions, and we have to live with those consequences. Now, Solomon issues his warning in a more proverbial tone, because he says, because you hate knowledge and do not revere God's instructions and command, because you won't take the advice of your father and brush aside all my offerings to train you, you will be destroyed, and anything that you acquire will be destroyed also. Those who listen and obey will live in safety and peace without fear of harm. Solomon is saying to a young nation and to young people of every generation that we must listen and learn from those who have experienced life before us. Merely because things are now happening in cyberspace, people's motivations and desires have not changed. People have not changed. And we can learn from those who have experienced life before us. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.
We're going to follow up with another short video clip for the Skit Guys that sort of coincides with our lesson, and we hope you enjoy it.
Its message is, remember, dads, that our children watch and remember everything we say and do.
No matter how old we are, we always remember what our dads say and do.
My dad is more like Jesus than your dad.
Nuh-uh. My dad doesn't let anybody eat any food until we pray for it.
My dad prays for 1 minute every day.
You know what? Our church has pancakes.
This is what my sister and mom use for their blush. My dad says that mean kids never know what they're talking about, because their parents don't know what they're talking about either.
My dad says to punch meanies in the face. Then my mom says, don't ever do that. And my dad goes to timeout.
My dad's beard is itchy whenever he kisses me.
My dad takes me to church so we could learn to be just like Jesus.
My daddy prays for me. Then he makes me stop talking and go to bed. Then I get a flashlight and read my comic book.
That's a sin. He's sinning.
No, I'm not.
Sinner.
No, I'm not.
R2.
I'm not.
My dad said that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it.
My dad never stays mad at me.
My dad taught me to forgive because Jesus forgives us every time we ask.
I want a mohawk.
I wish I had hair.
It's okay. Your hair will probably grow back.
Thanks for being our dads for all our lives.
Well, I've drawn the straw, and I'm doing Proverbs 1 through 7, and then the ball's going to be in Mike's court for whatever he wants to say until we get down to verse 20, and I'll do 20 through 23 again, and then Mike will finish up. Proverbs 1 begins, verse 1, and it says, "The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel." And what we have learned are that the author of Proverbs wants us to know and understand is that there are important things that are a part of wisdom. Verse 2 of Proverbs 1 reads, "That men may know wisdom and instruction, understand words of insight, receive instruction in wise dealing, righteousness, justice, and equity, that prudence may be given to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. The wise man may also hear and increase in learning, and the man of understanding acquire skill, to understand a proverb and a figure, and the words of the wise and their riddles." Now, the author has designated or made the statement that how Solomon was conceived and thought of during his reign over the Holy Land, or the lands he was in charge of. King Solomon is celebrated in the Old Testament as wisdom's most illustrative representative, as it is fitting that Solomon's name should stand or be included in the first verse of the book, even though it really sort of gives the wrong impression as to its true ownership. In the story of his reign in 1 Kings, Solomon's wisdom appears in several lights. By his wisdom, he is enabled to rule justly. He is able to negotiate advantageous treaties with other states. He is able to acquire vast knowledge about the natural world and to compose literally thousands of proverbs and songs. The author of my commentary with regard to verses 2 through 6 in chapter 1 states, "The sage outlines the purpose of his book and the benefits to be gained from pondering it well." This passage gives us a flavor of the kind of opening address that would be given to new students beginning their studies in a wisdom school. The sage of Proverbs is commending his wisdom to ordinary folks, especially to the young. But carefully he adds a gentle hint that even those who have cut their wisdom teeth can still learn a thing or two. There is none too old to learn or too wise to become wiser. The sage invites whoever wishes to attend the school of wisdom to ponder Proverbs. Why ponder Proverbs? The short answer is unmistakable: to become wise, or at least wiser. He is trying to impress upon his students a sense of the wholeness and fullness that wisdom is, and perhaps also of his own deep emotional attachment to Proverbs. The word wisdom is given pride of place, as well it might, for it is the word which sums up the content and the goal of the sage's teaching. What does it mean? The Hebrew word for Proverbs, or these collective writings, is chokmah, and its meaning is not easy to pin down. It is a very rich word, and it will take the sage the rest of this passage and the rest of the book to spell it out. In Proverbs, The matter at hand is life itself, and the best results is the good, harmonious, and successful life. So for men to know wisdom is for them to have the skills needed to make a success of their lives. This is the first face of wisdom that we catch a glimpse of in today's lesson. So, how do we acquire the skillful mastery of life? The commentator says that instruction has in view the way wisdom is acquired. Basically, it means discipline, and it is the word for training in the schools of wisdom, whether in the classroom under the wisdom teacher or in the home under the care and instruction of the parents. Wisdom, to be sure, is the fruit of experience and is inquired through it. But the sage has no doubts that raw individual experience alone is not up to the demands of life. I love the phrase he quotes that wisdom is a hard teacher, and its lessons may be learned too late. Besides experience, there has to be training in the accumulated and collective experience of many generations, suitably distilled in the precepts and proverbs of the wise. Here then is the second face of wisdom in Proverbs, learning from the experience and the counsel of those who are older and wiser. This is a face of wisdom that young people especially do well to remember. But the word has another side to it. It also has in view the fruit of schooling in wisdom. This is a disciplined living. In large measure, the skill required for good and successful living is self-control. The man who would master life must master self. That is why we find the sage has so much to say about controlling the temper and tongue, passions and appetite. The New Testament in Galatians 5 verse 23 says and reminds us that self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit. The word understand and insight come from the same Hebrew root word. Both insight and its sister noun understanding are used interchangeably with wisdom. Thus the wise man is the man of understanding. At the same time, this family of words add their own color to what wisdom is and help enrich it. In 1 Kings, Solomon prays for wisdom that he may discern between good and evil. Discern is the same word translated understand in verse 2 that we previously read. Wise living requires the ability to reach sound decisions and to make right choices, and thus the ability to discriminate between what is right and what is wrong, what wholesome and what is damaging, what is important and what is unimportant, what is wise and what is foolish. It is the wisdom which takes stock of life to see what matters most, and which recognizes trivialities for what they really are. It is also the wisdom which knows when to turn the television off. A sage or narrator has in mind men's conduct in their daily dealings with one another, and spells out what wise dealings amount to: righteousness, justice, and equity. In the Old Testament, these are great qualities of conduct which make for the good and well-being of the community, one of which all men play by the rules, where one man's rights are as important as another, and where honesty and integrity are the only policies. Here then the ethical and moral face of wisdom comes to the fore, and the sage reinforces his own way what the law and the prophets have to say about God's people and how they should live together. The word Proverbs can be translated as craftiness. The New English Bible catches it. It is well by translating it as shrewdness. This is what Jesus commended to his disciples when he told them to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And that was in Matthew 10. The opening 6 verses look especially at the direction of young people. It lends urgency to the task of teaching the young the ways of wisdom, before it is too late, or as the sage might put it, before the simple become out and out fools. Now verse 7 in chapter 1 talks about, and let me read it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. This is one of the best known texts in Proverbs. Its words have been adopted as the motto and inscribed over the entrance of many schools and colleges. The fear of the Lord is an important theme in the Old Testament generally. There are two sides to it, and they must always be held together. The first is a deep-seated reverence and awe in recognition of the holiness of God and the world He created. This aspect is brought out most dramatically in those stories where God makes His presence known in some special way. Thus, when God reveals Himself to Moses at the burning bush, we read that Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. This side of fearing God is summed up in Isaiah 8, verse 13, which reads, "The Lord of hosts, Him you shall regard as holy. Let Him be your fear, and let Him be your dread." In Proverbs 9:10, we are told, "Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." The wise man in Proverbs is a man of the world, who has his wits about him and knows how to get the best out of life, and to live his life to its fullest potential. So here the sage insists that religious faith is the essential foundation for a good, happy, and prosperous life. The fool who despises wisdom can either be a man of the world who has no time for God, or the man of God who has no time for the world. Or as we might say, either people who are so earthly minded as to be of no heavenly use, or people who are so heavily minded as to be of no earthly use.
My first passage begins at 1 Proverbs, beginning with verse 8. Now, verses 8 through 19 deal with, first, with this idea of a father's instruction. You could say it goes back to this idea of the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord isn't just being afraid that your father is going to spank your bottom when he gets home for whatever reason suits him. It means that you respect your father, you love your father, and you understand that your father loves you and will treat you with the best of everything he can afford for you. He will also be ready and willing to discipline us when we need it. There are some other words that maybe needs a little bit of clearing up. For instance, in verse 10 in this section, they use the word sinners. The writer of Proverbs does not use sinners quite in the same way it's used elsewhere, certainly not in the Gospels and not in some of in the Pentateuch. Here in Proverbs, sinners is used more in the sense of a hardened offender. These are people who have sinned against the Holy Spirit, if you will. These are the ones that are lost. They have no regard for their fellow human beings. They have no fear of God, and they will do whatever suits them at any moment in time, whether it's theft or murder or rape or take your pick. Let me begin reading with verse 8. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and reject not your mother's teaching, for they are a fair garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us wantonly ambush the innocent. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, and we shall fill our houses with spoil. Throw in your lot among us, and we will have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of all who get gain by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors. This again goes back to an old Reformed theological concept of God doesn't have to punish us so much because He really set up the world in such a way that the penalty for the sin is inherent in the sin itself. When we do wrong, though there will be consequences to what we do, and they will come back to bite us every time. Now, when the father figure in this particular section gives his instruction, he keeps very much to the same three-part outline, and you will find this particular outline all the way through Proverbs. 1, he appeals for his son to pay attention and take heart to what he has to say. B, he counsels his son to embrace the wise course and avoid the foolish course. You remember, I remember as a kid going to see John Calhoun when he was still a pediatrician. And sitting in his office, he would have magazines for the parents, but he also had highlights for children. And one of the little cartoon strips that we turned to first thing every time we went to see John Calhoun was the cartoon strip Goofus and Gallant. These were two boys. It was sort of like Wally and Eddie Haskell. You had one kid who was always getting into trouble. He was doing the wrong thing. He was rude. He was selfish. He was mean. He stole. He did this. He did that. And then you have this other child, Gallant, who always does the right thing. And what he's saying is, be a gallant. Don't be a goofus. And then the third part of this, or section C, is that he impresses upon his son and his daughter the benefits of obeying his counsel and the unpleasant consequences of ignoring it. Wise parents and good teacher that he is, he does not simply tell his son what he should and should not do, and he also tells him why. For at the end of the day, it is his son's good sense that will count the most. It is his choices that make the difference in the quality and the quantity of his own life. That's similar to the tack taken by the Darwin Awards. I imagine most of you have heard of it. The Darwin Awards have been handed out annually, I believe, since about 1993. The Darwin Awards are given to people who have, much to the benefit of future generations, removed their own genes from the human gene pool, doing our future generations a favor. That is to say, they are so stupid that we don't want other people to be born that stupid ever again. For instance, past winners include the thief who attempted to purloin a piece of heavy steel that he assumed was scrap. But it was that big heavy piece of cast iron that connects a cable to an elevator. And he made the mistake of disconnecting and trying to steal this piece while he was on the elevator and plummeted 23 floors to his death in the elevator car, thereby removing his genes from our gene pool. There was a man who attempted to hitch a ride home by tying his shopping cart to the back of an elevated train in Chicago. The man stealing a ride home by hitching his shopping trolley to the back of this train was drug about 2 miles before anybody really got everything stopped and got him untangled from the rope that he had used to tie his shopping cart onto it. Then there was this one's one of my favorites. It was the terrorist who posted a letter bomb with insufficient postage, and who, upon its return, unthinkingly opened his own letter, blowing himself to smithereens. There was a respected Toronto attorney who decided to demonstrate the strength of the firm's boardroom unbreakable windows for a group of interns that they were trying to recruit, and he did this by throwing himself against them. Unfortunately, the windows proved a little less indestructible than advertised, and this lawyer plunged 17 stories to the courtyard below. This one worries me a little bit because the managing partner of his law firm reported that the dearly departed attorney was one of the best and brightest members of the 200-plus lawyer firm. What he's saying is, stay away from them. Don't get too close. You keep your distance from them and you'll be safe. But if you get too close to them, if you start to associate with them, sooner or later they're going to get you to do something that you will later regret. I'm going to show you a short video now of some children. They are given a marshmallow and it's set on the table in front of them. They are told if they can sit in the chair and not eat the marshmallow while mom is gone from the room, when she gets back, they will get that marshmallow plus an extra marshmallow for them to eat. And we get to watch them as they struggle with their own temptation.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow, for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
It's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. Alright, so I'm going to leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did? Yeah. You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
Now, the writer of Proverbs makes no bones about what we should do. It's not just a matter of saying no. We have to steer well clear of those who would tempt us. And the best way for us to steer clear is to focus on something other than the fools that are around us, those who would lead us into the same depth of sin in which they have found themselves. A life of violence and crime, says the sage, pays a cruel dividend. It is self-destructive. And like the kids with the marshmallows, if we can resist the temptation, then life is better and we profit by the right actions.
Mike's story reminded me of one that when my sons were married, early on in their marriage, I got a Father's Day card from my son Jason. Didn't get one from Jeff, but I got one from Jason. And it said, Dad, you remember all that great advice you gave me growing up? And that was on the front of the card. You opened it up and it said, I wasn't listening then. Would you write it down and send me a copy of it? And that is still true today. When we get to verse 20, the sage makes a subtle change and makes it clear that Lady Wisdom is the one that is talking to you. And verses 20 through 23 read as follows. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the market she raises her voice. On the top of the wall she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? Give heed to my reproof. Behold, I pour out my thoughts to you. I will make my words known to you. In this passage I just read, the character or the speaker is referred to as Lady Wisdom, seems to be little more than just a literary and poetic personification of the sage's teaching, devised to make its appeal more forceful and dramatic. Lady Wisdom stands more on the side of God than of man, and is a spokesman for divine wisdom and the fear of God. In verse 22, Lady Wisdom outlines the kinds of fools who pass before her eyes. Characters who still rub shoulders in the busy street or city center. The simple is the inexperienced and gullible youth we meet in verse 4 earlier. The scoffer is the person who is arrogant and self-opinionated and always ready to debunk the views and beliefs of others. The scoffer takes his seat in the company with the wicked and the sinners. In this verse, Lady Wisdom is no gentle persuader. She shouts, she pleads, scolds, reasons, threatens, warns, and even laughs at those who don't take her seriously. Lady Wisdom is capable of pulpit bashing and hellfire preaching. Oh, quite unladylike in our denomination, and nowadays also quite unfashionable, perhaps even frowned on. The author of the daily study guide I'm using for today's Proverbs lesson reminds us that church mission and church witness will never be terribly effective unless they are seen to be terribly urgent. How do you perceive it? What do you think is important in our mission and witness?
Our first chapter of Proverbs ends with the rejection of Lady Wisdom. She has made her appeal in the short passage just before. She wants humans to listen, to heed her words, and then to follow what she has told them. But we don't. And so she expresses her hurt at this rejection, and she just lays out for those who are listening what the consequences are when they fail to heed her words. So I'll begin reading at verse 24. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, and you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when panic strikes you. And when panic strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way and be sated with their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacence of fools destroys them. But he who listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of evil. So she has cajoled them first, and then she tries to browbeat them, and she does no better with her words than the simple and decisive words, "Thus saith the Lord," such as in Isaiah 65. Appeal gives way to accusation, and strong verbs are now used to indict the fools. Refuse to listen, no one has heeded, ignored, have none of, hated, did not choose, despised. Men were not simply too busy to notice Lady Wisdom was there and to hear her appeal. They were willfully indifferent and even hostile. The crux of the matter, however, was their deliberate rejection of the fear of the Lord. Their rejection of Lady Wisdom amounted to rejection of God and His divine wisdom. These are the kind of people the psalmist has in his mind when he says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." These are the people who might nod at God on Sundays, but who live their lives Monday through Saturday as if God didn't matter. Quite appropriately, therefore, the accusation in these verses strikes the same note as the prophet's indictment of Israel for spurning God. They refuse to know me. That's in Jeremiah 9. They have not given heed to my words. Jeremiah 6. They are not willing to listen to me. Ezekiel 3. They hate the good. Micah 3. They chose what I did not delight in. Isaiah 65. And they have despised the Holy One of Israel. Isaiah 1:4. For Lady Wisdom, the fool's response spelled rejection. That is often the way of God's man or woman in the world. His spokespeople are seldom popular figures. The prophets were not, and neither was Jesus. For the fools themselves, it spelled a wasted opportunity and more. Now, as the rebellious people's rejection of God was fraught with dire consequences, so too is the fool's rejection of Lady Wisdom. Alongside their accusation is the threat of judgment. The hearty guffaw that Lady Wisdom gives in verse 26 is jarring. It is meant to be. It is part of her shock tactics. Can you imagine what it would be like to be laughed at by God as you are perishing as a result of your own actions? Her shock tactics are meant to persuade fools to depart from their folly. Fools are rushing headlong and headstrong to their very ruin. And she has 5 things to say about the ruin of fools. It will come when they are least expecting it and strike them with sheer terror. It will come with devastating and overwhelming force, like a storm or a whirlwind. It will bring them to their senses, and it will be too late. They are bringing it upon themselves. And finally, they will have only themselves to blame. Now, there is one way we can respond to the words of Lady Wisdom and to avoid the consequences that she's laid before us. Anytime we are faced with temptation, anytime we are being called by the foolish to join them in their folly, we only need to keep our eyes on the Master. By focusing on Him, His Word, His presence, His past help, His promises of future help, then we are almost guaranteed of success. I'm going to show you another short video, and this one is of a dog who's being tempted to eat a dog bone when his master has given him explicit instructions not to.
Peace out.
Move back to there. Alright, wait.
Notice that he's looking at the master. He's not looking at the food.
Eat it, buddy.
Now we have the distraction.
Eat it, buddy. Eat it.
He wants to eat it.
Come on, buddy. Eat it. Eat it.
Not
Eat
yet.
it, buddy. Eat it. Come on, buddy.
The distractions are saying to eat it.
Eat it. Come on, buddy. Eat it. It's all right. It's okay. Come on, buddy. It's okay. Just obey them. Eat it. Eat it. Eat it. Eat it. Eat it, buddy. Eat it. Eat it. Eat it. Okay. Good boy. Good job. Way to go. Ash.
Finally, as the dog has learned, and hopefully as we should, the best way for us to survive in this world is to keep the main thing the main thing. Focus on the Master. This world is not about us. We are very much like a picture frame. When we call attention to ourselves, we are calling attention away from the very reason we were created, and that is to set off the picture that we surround. We are to focus on God, and God should get all the glory. And that is what He wants us to do. And the help that He is able to give and the reward that awaits us if we persevere will guarantee our success in His name.
What's our song for?
We have a song, it's called the Wisdom Song. It's a relatively new one, and it's done by a young lady. I've forgotten her name again, but it's very pretty. It's a folksy sort of tune. I think you'll really like it.
Is where wisdom starts. Above all else, please guard your heart, for out of your heart flow the issues of life. It matters how you spend your time. There is a path that leads to life, a narrow way only few find. Meditate on God's word in the day, in the night. You'll know blessings of every kind. Like a tree planted by water, shall you be, son, daughter. You bear fruit in season, you'll prosper. Like a tree planted by water. Holy Spirit is here. Only believe. Supernatural life is yours every day. Miracles in Jesus' name. Do what is good. Do what is right. Flee from evil with all your might. Guard your ears and guard your eyes. You have the mind of Christ. Like a tree planted by water, shall you be, son, daughter. You bear fruit in season, you'll prosper. Like a tree planted by water. Forgive yourself. Forgive your family. Forgive your friends. Forgive your enemies. Do justice, love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. Remove offense, make peace. Do not judge. Forgive yourself. Forgive your family. Forgive your friends. Forgive your enemies. Do justice, love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. Remove offense, make peace. Do not judge. Like a tree planted by water, shall you be, son, daughter. You'll bear fruit in season, you'll prosper. Like a tree planted by water.